The House on Black Ash Road. The note waited on the kitchen table like a verdict. Don't go in the back room after dark. Lock the door. If you hear the humming, don't answer. The paper had yellowed to the color of old teeth, and the looping script was unmistakable, Aunt Rose's hand, gentle even when she was telling you something you didn't want to hear. Clara Whitmore didn't believe in warnings you could fold. She'd driven up from Philadelphia in a sleet that hung like tinsel off the power lines, with 2 travel mugs of coffee and a box of sensible grief, the kind you take out in public. Rose had been the relative who remembered birthdays, who slipped 20s under lasagna at holidays, who'd once mailed Clara a pair of wool socks with a note that read, "For when you forget you were born somewhere that can hurt you." When Rose's lawyer called about the house 2 stories, a tired porch, a parcel of woods behind, Clara had said yes without thinking. People like her didn't inherit. They were given errands by the dead. The house on Black Ash Road was 3 miles outside Westfield, a town where the river took its time and the stoplight made its own rules. Out here, snow didn't melt so much as change its mind. The place had a face shutters blinking loose, a porch warped to a sad smile, ash trees lifting their dark bones. Inside, the radiators knocked like someone too polite to knock harder. Rose's perfume violets, soap hung around the curtains, as if a window had been left open for a memory. The back room door was at the end of the upstairs hall, where the wallpaper's flowers had learned the posture of survivors. A keyhole winked in its brass plate. Empty. Clara pressed her palm to the wood and felt cold come back through. Not the winter kind, but the kind from a freezer aisle where nothing is dead exactly, just held. She listened. Silence has flavors. This one tasted like a battery on the tongue. At 11:14 p.m., the house hummed. It began low, as if the furnace had taken up singing. The note ran under the floorboards, through the balusters, along the water pipes, and set a glass on the sink to trembling. When Clara held her breath, the sound got bigger, as if her breathing had been a bandage. She stood in the hall, bare feet on wood, and felt the note ride her bones. The hum lasted 9 seconds. Stopped. The radiator knocked twice, a gentleman clearing his throat. Somewhere a door whispered the way doors whisper when they're making a point about hinges. Clara slept badly. She dreamed she was a child in a church where the priest had no face, and the candles were all humming in the same key. In the morning, she found the front door unlatched and her boots on the wrong mat. She told herself she'd been careless, and told herself so sternly she almost believed it. At the diner in town, Dolly's, where the pie case turned like a slow argument, Clara asked the waitress about a locksmith. "Black Ash?" the woman asked, pouring coffee. Her name tag said Dolores, but everyone called her Dolly because this was a place that named you after what it needed from you. "Lock the back room," Dolly said. "It's already locked." "Then keep it that way." Dolly set down the coffee and put a spoon beside it like a blessing. Rose did. "You knew her?" Dolly's shrug was a whole county. "Everybody knows everybody until we don't." Rose minded her porch and her garden. She came in Thursdays for tuna on rye and read the paper like it might apologize. Didn't come some weeks, came others, paid cash, never lied about the weather. She leaned in. "If you hear the humming, don't answer." Clara laughed because the alternative was to ask what that meant. Dolly didn't laugh. "Some rooms don't need a mouth to talk," she said. "They use yours." The library sat in a sandstone building with a clock tower that had gotten shy about minutes. Mr. Halpern, the librarian, had the air of a man who'd been asked too many times whether books still mattered. "Back room," he said when Clara asked about the house, as if that were a proper noun. He pulled a gray box from the archive room. Inside, brittle newspaper clippings, photocopied coroner reports, Polaroids fogged to ghosts. The headline from 1972 read, "Local man found no foul play suspected." The photograph showed a chair in a small room and a rope coiled on the floor, like a sentence run out of words. "Who was he?" Clara asked. "Depends who you ask," Halpern said. "Frank Whitmore if you ask the tax records. Frank Whitmore if you ask anyone who owes him nothing. Frankie to his mother. That man if you ask Rose." He closed the lid on the box as if it might leak. "People say he was a drinker. People say he wasn't. People say he was cruel. People always say someone was cruel when they need a container for a mess they can't mop." He paused. Rose stopped coming into town for a season after that. Then she started again. Brought a book to the counter every week like an apology she didn't owe. On the way out, Clara noticed a corkboard by the door with missing cat flyers and the flyer for the pancake breakfast at the fire hall. In the corner, a yellowed index card in Rose's handwriting, Garden Club meets Saturdays. All welcome. Beneath, a darker line in smaller letters, the way women write to themselves, don't forget yourself in a house. The hum came again that night, right on time. Clara sat on the stairs with a blanket and counted in the way a child counts to survive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. After the 9th second, the silence rushed back in like a tide, embarrassed for not being on schedule. She stood and walked because her body believed in the rituals of motion. In the bathroom, steam had collected on the mirror, although she hadn't bathed. In the fog, someone had drawn a circle. Inside the circle, a small cross, then another, like tally marks. She wiped the glass, and the marks didn't smear. The glass was dry under her towel. She left the light on. She found the key on the 4th day, not by looking, but by needing something else. In the pantry, behind a dented tin of beets nobody had loved, lay a brass key tied with blue thread. A paper tag, too small for proper instructions, said simply, "Cold months only." Rose's script again. The tag smelled faintly of violets and wood smoke. Clara put the key in her pocket and carried it all day like a hot coin, as if having it meant safety, as if any key ever did. The backroom door opened at 11:13. It wasn't the key. It was Will. Clara stood at the end of the hall and watched the latch turn. The door swung an inch. The humming started low, then fuller, then right through her. She put her palm against the wood. The hum crawled up her arm like a waking. She stepped back. The door opened another inch. She could see darkness, a darkness with texture like velvet that had been left out in rain. She said aloud to the empty house, because empty deserves the respect of manners, "No." The door stopped. The hum cut. The radiator cleared its throat. Somewhere a fox barked at something only foxes forgive. Clara slept in the guest room that night, as if geography could outwit whatever mathematics the house preferred. She dreamed of Rose standing by the ash trees in a summer dress, hair-pinned with 2 bobby pins in a cross like a quiet no. Rose put her fingers to her lips, a plea for silence, then shook her head. "Not that kind," Dream Rose said. "The good kind." When Clara woke, the house smelled like bread someone had considered baking. When the mail finally caught up to Winter, there was a letter from Pastor Nolan Pike of Westfield Community Church, typed with the confidence of a man sure of where his words would land. "Dear Ms. Whitmore, in light of your recent bereavement, please know that our community stands ready to help with any transition needs." A handwritten postscript. "If the back room is a burden, some doors are meant to stay closed. We've all agreed." His signature had a flourish at the end, the kind a person practices. At Dolly's, a man in a Union jacket sat at the counter and didn't look at Clara until he did. "You're Rose's niece," he said. "I hauled lumber for your uncle when my back still thought it was young. He came into some money then. Then he didn't." He tapped his coffee mug. "We don't talk about Frank." "I'm not asking about him," Clara said, and found that she meant it. "I'm asking about the room." The man his cap said Vietnam vets laughed without moving his mouth. "Same question, different noun," he said. He slid a folded photo across the counter. Black and white. The house, summer 1971. A group on the porch, men with their shirt sleeves rolled, women with their hair in scarves. Rose stood at the railing, one hand on the post, the other at her throat. Next to her, a man with a grin too easy. On the back, in pencil, "Picnic." "Humming started last week. Don't tell Mother. Bring sugar." Clara took the photo to the library. Mr. Halpern found a city directory and an old rotary phone. "Ask me why a library keeps these," he said. "No, really, ask." He didn't wait, because sometimes the present doesn't pick up. He dialed a number from the margin of a 1973 Ledger Rose's Garden Club. A click, the sound of an empty line thinking. Then a voice, a woman's, thin with distance, said, "Operator?" "This is the library," Mr. Halpern said, and the line went dead with the efficiency of a door you should not have opened. Halpern set the receiver down carefully, like a teacup he hadn't earned. "Some places keep their own hours," he said. "Your house is one. The back room is the clock." At 11:14, the humming came again, and this time it had shape. Clara stood in the doorway, key in hand, and listened for corners. She heard, beneath the hum, a breath. Then another. The sound of chair legs, a rope, a man swallowing a word he wouldn't get to finish. She slid the key into the lock. It turned easy, like a yes made in the wrong room. The door opened into cold. The back room was smaller than the hallway implied, or perhaps the room knew how to be small when it wanted to. The wallpaper had failed at being flowers and become stains. The chair sat in the middle, a modest wooden thing whose only sin was endurance. On it lay a coil of rope, polite as a handshake. In the far wall, a window of the kind farmhouses favor, square, stubborn, a frame for weather. Through it, trees stood in a wind that hadn't reached the house. Clara stepped over the threshold, and the humming stopped, like a train pulling into a station that didn't want to be caught moving. The silence was thick enough to spoon. "I'm not here for him," Clara said, because if the room was a mouth, it deserved a sentence. "I'm here for her." She didn't say Rose's name. Names are hooks. You throw them into water, and sometimes you pull back the wrong fish. "You always say that," said a voice from the corner. The voice had the texture of flannel and cigarettes. A man stood there, not entirely in the corner and not entirely out of it. His face was a series of decisions. He wore a work jacket with Whitmore stitched above the pocket in the labor of a wife. "You say you're here for her, and then you stare where I left the chair." "You're frank," Clara said, though the photos and the clippings had taught her nothing about the angle of his shoulders or the way his hands tried not to clench when he said her aunt's name. He smiled without apology. "I'm what's left," he said. "The room keeps leftovers." "We don't keep you," Clara said, and surprised herself with the heat in it. "We keep the part that warns." He tilted his head, amused. "Warnings are just stories dressed for church." He nodded to the rope. "Pick it up." "No." "You never do," he said, and then his face shifted, not shape, exactly, but weather. For a blink, Rose stood there, her mouth the soft line Clara knew from photos. "Clara," Rose said, and moved like a mother moves toward a child having a bad dream. "You can leave if you give the room a name, any name, yours will do." The room breathed in. "Or," Rose said, and now the voice was only hers, "you can stay and finish what I started." "What did you start?" Clara asked, the way you ask a door what's behind it, knowing it won't tell you yet. "Counting," Rose said. "Writing it down. Saying the quiet parts where someone might hear. The room liked that less." Her smile tilted. "Men liked it less." Clara backed to the doorway, her heel catching on a knot in the floor that hadn't been there a second earlier. The cold climbed her calves like a tide. "I'm not here to be brave," she said, shaking and angry at herself for shaking. "I'm here to be finished." "Finish it then," said Frank, already half fog, half opinion. "Give the house a name." Clara shut the door and locked it. The key came out warm. She held it until her palm remembered metal. In the morning, she took the note from the kitchen table and taped it to the refrigerator where instructions belong. She called the church number from the pastor's letter and got an answering machine that said, with a smile you could hear, "You've reached Westfield Community. Leave a message after the tone, and we'll get back to you in God's time." She didn't leave a message. She went to Dolly's, where "we" meant the people in line and the people not in line yet. She ordered tuna on rye because it seemed rude not to. "You look like you argued with a freezer," Dolly said, refilling her mug. "I opened the back room," Clara said, because sometimes telling the truth out loud is the only way to turn the volume down in your head. Dolly didn't scold. She didn't call Clara foolish. She put a piece of pie on the counter and pushed it across. "Eat first," she said. "Then tell me where the chair is," Clara told her. Dolly listened, hands folded. When Clara was done, Dolly said, "Frank was always a man who thought a house should be quiet. The house disagreed. Rose thought a house should hear. You should decide what a house should be." She wiped the counter with the rag she favored for counseling. "Halpern's got a binder of minutes from the garden club. They wrote more truth into those meetings than the church ever did into a sermon." The binder was green with a spine that had learned to live with pressure. Halpern set it on the table with a librarian's tenderness. Inside, clipped agendas, grocery lists, the names of who'd bring seeds, who'd bring coffee, who'd bring a husband once and never again. Between April and May 1972, the minutes changed tense. Questions became declarations. Someone wrote, "Discussed safety for women walking home in dusk." Someone else wrote, "If something hums in your house, you don't owe it your voice." Underlined twice, "Count ourselves." In the margin, a small drawing of a chair. Clara photocopied the pages and slid them into plastic sleeves, the bureaucratic armor of truth. She bought a spiral notebook and wrote the date at the top of the first page. 11:14 p.m. Humming. 9 seconds. Door turned 2 degrees, cold at ankle height. She wrote what she'd found in the archives. She wrote what Dolly said. She wrote what Halpern didn't say, which was sometimes the part with edges. That night she didn't wait for the hum. At 10:50, she sat on the floor outside the door with her back to the wall and her knees up, the way kids sit when they're trying to be taller than their fear. When the hum came, she breathed through it. Breath in 4, hold 4, out 6. The trick a therapist once gave her for panic on subways. The note built itself like scaffolding. It asked for her name. She kept her mouth shut and wrote, "The room wants a mouth. I have one. It can have paper." At 11:18, the house knocked twice. She stood and unlocked the door and didn't open it. "Rose," she said, and writing it here feels like an act that should have witnesses. "I'll finish it." The hum deepened, then receded, like gratitude that doesn't want to be seen in public. Morning brought a letter slid under the back door. Not mailed, folded. Pastor Pike again. "We understand grief manifests in dramatics. For the sake of the community, please refrain from engaging with the room. It is uncharitable to stir." Beneath, handwritten, "We have always agreed." His signature had added a second flourish, the way men double down when a woman persists. Clara took the letter to the library and copied it. She put one copy in the garden club binder, and one in her notebook, and one on the community board beside the pancake breakfast flyer. Dolly laughed when she saw it and pinned a recipe card next to it. Lemon bars for when men write you letters. The town didn't turn against Clara so much as adjust around her. At the hardware store, the clerk asked if she needed rock salt and meant, "Do you plan to stay?" At the post office, the woman behind the counter asked if she wanted a P.O. box and meant, "Will you give us a place to put the parts of your life you don't want on the porch?" People nodded to her, in the way people nod to a woman walking a large dog. Respect with a side of calculation. At 11:14 each night, the hum came. Some nights it arrived as a request. Some nights as a dare. Clara answered the same way, by writing it down and singing nothing back. She made a list of names from the minutes and the clippings, a litany of women who had decided not to be translated by rooms. Rose, Dolores, yes, Marlene, Halpern's late wife, it turned out. Ruth from the English department at the school, who'd once organized the juniors to write letters to the editor about the cost of girls' uniforms. She wrote Frank's name, too, and next to it, "Left here by men who preferred that version." The pastor came once in the afternoon in a coat that wanted to be invited in. "You're filling people's heads," he said pleasantly, "with notions." "I'm filling paper," Clara said. "Notions take themselves where they need to go." "You're upsetting the order." "It was upset," she said. "It just stopped pretending." He smiled tightly and left a pamphlet on the porch. Peace in the home. She used it as a bookmark in the binder. February brought a thaw that pretended to be spring and got away with it for 2 days. The ash grove behind the house lifted its black lattice against a sky so blue it felt newly painted. Clara walked the path Rose had worn between the back steps and a small cleared circle where an old bench leaned. There, half buried near the bench's foot, Clara found a tin box. Inside, seed packets, Cosmos Zinnia, a postcard from Carlisle, "Wish you were here," and a small envelope with a single key. The tag said, "Summer," on the back in Rose's hand, "for when the house wants you to forget you have a garden." On the last day of the thaw, the hum didn't wait for its time. It began at 4:30, insistent as a knock. Clara put her hand on the back room door, and the hum rose to meet it like a vein under a wrist. She unlocked the door and opened it a hand's width. The chair sat where it sat. The rope was not on the seat. It hung from a nail. The window showed trees without wind. Frank stood in the corner and smiled the smile of a man who thinks he's become a tradition. "Count," he said. "No," Clara told him, and felt something harden in her spine, the way water does when it decides to be ice. "We count us." She held up the notebook. "I'm writing it down. You don't get to be the only name." The room shivered. The hum broke and reformed on a higher note, not a warning now, but a question. Rose stood where Frank had been and looked tired in the way women look when rest is more dangerous than work. "Thank you," she said, and the window fogged from the inside. In the fog, tallies appeared as if a finger had drawn them. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. The marks matched the number of names Clara had written. She added another with her fingertip. The glass drank it in like thirst. After that, the town did what towns do when something becomes true in public. Half pretended not to notice, half brought casseroles. Dolly started putting Clara's pie in a to-go box before she ordered. Mr. Halpern put the binder on a shelf labeled Local Histories, as if the shelves themselves had cast a vote. Women came by the house in daylight: Ruth with a bag of tea, May from the welding class with a new lock for the back door, a woman in a denim jacket who didn't give her name but looked at the door like it was a sister. They stood in the kitchen and said sentences with subjects. They shook their key rings in the hall like applause that didn't wake children. The men adjusted. The pastor's second letter arrived with more italics. The school board vice chair asked at Dolly's if anyone else was hearing a hum, and 3 women told him no at the same time with the piety of actors. Walter Dunn from the county office, apologies balancing on his tongue like plates, stopped by to say the commissioners were concerned about liability. Clara gave him a copy of the minutes and a lemon bar. He ate the bar and held the pages like a person handed a live bird. Clara's fear changed shape. It became a corridor she knew the turns of. She slept sometimes. She dreamed less of ropes and more of gardens that needed watering. When the hum came, she wrote and breathed and thought of Rose, walking to the bench with seed packets in her pocket, counting out loud not to keep fear away, but to give it something to do with its hands. The end didn't arrive. It gathered. On a night when the forecast said snow but got rain that made the road into a wire, the hum came at 11:14 and fractured into chords. The chair scraped. The rope hissed against wood. Clara felt, more than heard, footsteps in the hall outside the room where she stood inside the room, a geometry that made no sense until she understood that the house had more than one hallway. Frank's voice came like a draft. "Last chance," he said. "Give me a name." Clara opened the door all the way. The cold swarmed her thighs, her ribs. She stepped forward and took the rope off the nail. It weighed less than her fear and more than her doubt. She set it on the floor and sat in the chair because someone needed to, and because sitting is also a way of standing. The hum rose like a wind carrying a train. "Rose Whitmore," Clara said very clearly, in a voice she wished she'd had at 16. "Counted." She named the women from the binder one by one, and with each name, the window wrote a mark. When she reached her own, she hesitated. Then she said, "Clara Whitmore, present." The room exhaled. The rope fell into a circle at her feet, a harmless snake. The hum softened to something like a refrigerator in a house where nothing is broken. Rose stood by the window, her face her own, not a flicker, not a mask. "You finish for me," she said. "I left when I should have stayed. Or I stayed when I should have left. Both can be true. Either way, I left you a garden." Frank was gone. Or he had been counted somewhere that couldn't use him anymore. The chair was a chair again, stubborn, ordinary, a thing that could hold a person without deciding what they were. Clara stood and lifted the rope and carried it downstairs. She took it to the ash grove and lit it. Rope doesn't burn easily unless you help it. She helped it. The smoke rose in a straight line like a letter that knows its address. When it was ash, she stamped it into the snow with her boot heel, the way you stamp a decision. The next morning, the pastor came with a casserole and the kind of smile that implies a camera. "We heard you had a gathering," he said, glancing at the ash grove as if it might clap. "If you'd like to donate the backroom furniture to the church, we can arrange—" "It's not for sale," Clara said. "It's not for donation. It's not for you." She took the casserole because food is not at fault and set it on the counter next to her notebook. The pastor looked at the notebook the way people look at thunder when it takes its time. He left. The casserole was chicken and rice, and it tasted like a woman who makes food so people won't starve while men make decisions. By March, the house had learned a new trick. Quiet. Not silence. The humming still came, reliable as weather, but the quiet of a place that had been seen. Clara painted the upstairs hall a color with a name that sounded like an apology, Greek villa, and let it dry while snow finally remembered how to be spring. She planted zinnias in the cleared circle by the bench and started seedlings on the kitchen sill. She hosted the garden club, which turned out to be 3 women, and the idea of the 4th. They drank tea and wrote minutes and laughed when the radiator knocked like an old man, pretending he hadn't been listening. On the first warm Thursday, Clara drove into town and filed a deed update at the county office. In the blank for easements or encumbrances, she wrote in neat print, "Occupied by memory." The clerk looked at it, looked at her, and stamped it without comment because sometimes bureaucracy surprises you. She took a copy to the library and slipped it into the binder. Mr. Halpern read it and, for the first time since she'd met him, smiled with his whole face. "Local history," he said, and put the binder back on the shelf like a flag. That night, 11:14 came and went, without a hum. The house held its breath, and then let it go. Clara stood in the hall waiting to be told what to feel. Nothing came. She went downstairs and poured water and stood at the sink and looked out at the ash grove and thought about the way a place becomes a person once you've argued with it enough to know how it fights. She laughed, a small, tired sound, and said into the kitchen, "Okay." At 11:16, a single note rose, not from the back room but from the radiator in the kitchen. It sounded like approval. Clara said, "Okay," again, because consent is a practice. She turned off the light and stood at the porch door and listened to rain making the road into an idea. She did not check the back room. She did not need to. In April, when the ash trees budded with a green so new it could be mistaken for shyness, Clara found a small package in the mailbox with no return address. Inside, a key on a blue thread and a note in Rose's hand. "Summer," it read, "for the nights that sing." Clara held the key and felt, for the first time since the lawyer's call, the steadying weight of a future that could stand on its own legs. That night, she slept with the window cracked and dreamed of zinnias. In the morning, the humming did not come. She made coffee and carried a mug out to the bench and sat with the binder and her notebook and the sound of a road learning to be quiet. When she looked up, a woman stood at the edge of the grove. Denim jacket, hair pinned with 2 bobby pins. "I won't come in," the woman said, "but I wanted to see if it worked." "It did," Clara said. The woman nodded once. "Tell Dolly I'll be by for pie." She turned and was gone in the way good news goes when it's done its job. Clara went back inside. She set the summer key on a nail by the back door and put the pastor's casserole dish on the step with a note that said, "Thank you." She wrote the date in her notebook and then, because it felt right, wrote 2 words she wished someone had written for Rose in 1972. "We stayed."